What up, Facebook? It's your boy King, aka Mike, your mentor, and welcome to Man Up Friday. Hope you had a good week. We're gonna get into some really good stuff tonight as we're in the second session of Facing the Father Wound. And if you're new to this channel, welcome. You know, this is where I'm taking 38 years of my experience of growing up without a father and trying to figure out how to be a man, what that looks like, how to be a father, how to be a husband, just how to be the best man that I can be, how to be a good friend, right? And taking that wisdom and giving it back to other people that I know. Doesn't matter how young or old you are, wisdom's wisdom. It knows no bias against race, religion, creed, age. It transcends all those things. And a big thing that made a difference in my life, right, was realizing that there were other men who came alongside of me and poured into me. They planted seeds in me. They refused to let me settle for less. They held me to a higher standard. And we all need those people in our lives, and we all need to be those type of people to the younger generation coming up. And part of doing that, God really placed it on my heart for 2019 to come to you guys every single day with a different piece of content to just help, build men up. Because I was praying one day, and God put this question in my mind, and He said, "Where are all the real men at?" And it just hit me like a ton of bricks. I mean, you think of divorce, you think of, don't think, just turn on your TV, watch the news for 5 minutes, and you'll see the crazy chaos and everything that happens because men in today's world aren't accepting the responsibility that was given them, the responsibility that was placed on them in their marriage, the responsibility that was placed on them over their kids. And we've become, at least in Western society, a society of men who make excuses, who don't accept responsibility, who accept passivity in their lives. They refuse the greater good, and they don't invest internally into others and into themselves. And for 38 years, I didn't say anything. I didn't do anything about that. And I'm sick and tired of it. I'm sick and tired of watching men die physical deaths. I'm sick and tired of watching men die emotional deaths, live lives of silent surrender, right? Because they don't have good friends. They don't know how to ask for help. They don't know how to speak up. They don't know how to deal with all the crazy crap that life throws at you. That marriage throws at you, that being a parent throws at you, and it just eats you up inside because you're taught to just stuff it down and not think about it, and just, you're the man, you push through, right? You overcome these things, and you don't acknowledge them, and you lie to yourself, you lie to everybody else about how you're feeling and what you really think. And you just leave a path of destruction wherever you go because you haven't dealt with these things in your life, fair or not fair, that hinder you. And you carry them on your back like a weight everywhere you go. And you make them everyone else's problem. And you don't want to acknowledge that it's your problem. And you have a choice to do something about it. So that's what this page is about. I hope that you'll continue to join us every day. As we explore these different topics, these different things that God's placed on my heart. So without further ado, we're going to get into it tonight. So grab a journal, grab your phone, something to take notes, because you're going to want to come back to this stuff, because this stuff is really life-changing. This is not my content. All this content comes from The Quest for Authentic Manhood by Robert Lewis. It was a course I did when I had just moved to Chicago, and there was a lot of crazy going on in my life. Wasn't sure I wanted to be married. Didn't know what I was doing for a career. I had to start all over, just trying to figure all these things out. And this was a blessing to me at this time, and this really helped me identify some things in my past that were hindering me and stopping me from being able to move forward on my life in all these different areas. And every Friday we go through this book, and I teach you guys the things that I've learned and that Robert Lewis impressed upon me. So here we go. All right, Facing the Father Wound, Part 2. If you were here last week, and if you weren't here, this is a picture of my graduation, high school graduation. And there's my dad there in the middle. He was always a very dapper dresser the few times in life that I remember. And then you got my sister on the left there, my brother down below, and then there's me to the right. And this was a time where my dad actually followed through in one of the promises that he made me, and that he was going to come to my graduation. And he showed up, and when it was done, he was back off into the wind. He disappeared again. I talk about those type of things and how that affected my life, if you're curious, on Sundays in a thing that I call the Sunday Sermon. So, quick recap, right? Last week we talked about this father wound and how it affects our lives. And there were some things that we need to think about and questions we need to answer. And the first question we need to answer is, what will you give your son? And we briefly went over these in depth, right? The first thing is you want to make sure your son hears these things. I love you. I'm proud of you. You're good at. And then you want to notice his strengths, and then you want to name them. And then the second side of things is you want to make sure that your son has certain things in life. And, I would agree with part one, all those things. A son needs to hear his father say those things in his life, because only men can bestow manhood on another man. Women can't give that to men. It's just not the way it's made. Just like a man can't give womanhood to his daughter. That has to come from another woman. So this part B, make sure he has, these are some suggestions. I think that they're great for what every son needs from his father, and feel free to add to these however God impresses it on your heart. Every man needs a manhood vision and a manhood ceremony. Talked about this a little bit of detail last week. The last 2 Tuesdays I've been talking about this more in depth, what a manhood ceremony looks like. I gave an example of the one that I did for my son, and this coming Tuesday I'm going to lay out the framework for you guys. So if you're interested in doing this for your own son, and this can work for your daughter as well, you'll know how to come up and how to create one of these for your child, your son or your daughter, because it truly is life-changing. You want to make sure that your son has a code of conduct to live by, because you know what? If your son doesn't know, he's going to go out into the world and he's going to be unprepared, and he's going to discover things for himself. And some of those things that he's going to discover are not going to be truth. They're going to be lies, right? About how men should act, about what men should do, about what our responsibilities are. So you need to be proactive, and you need to give your son this code of conduct that they need to carry out through their life, right? And then it's not only in your immediate family, it's generational. Think about the impact that has. You can literally change your family tree with these things. And then you want to make sure your son has a transcendent cause, something to live for other than himself, right? A higher purpose, a goal that he's reaching for. How can he make the world a better place? What gifts and talents have been put inside him by God that only he can use to contribute to this world and to make it a better place for all of us. So here we go tonight. The 7 proactive cures. Oh my goodness, now I can't read because my face is in the way there. The 7 proactive cures for the absent father wound. I had to reference my notes there. Alright, so number 1, I hope you guys can read this. It's a little bit small tonight because there's a lot of content to go over, and I got it all on one page. Alright, the first one is, if you're a dad, right, it's never too late to close the gap with your son or sons, no matter how old they are. right? Don't buy into that lie that if you're an absent father, if you weren't around emotionally or physically, that you can't fix that. That's BS. You can fix it. All you got to do is choose to take responsibility for what you did, right? Acknowledge that, admit that, and then believe that God is going to restore that relationship and ask Him to. And He will with your sons. Because I don't care what you've done, what's happened, every son wants a relationship with his father. That's how we're wired. That's what God places in all of us. And that can be repaired. It may take some work, and that work may be on different levels. But if you're committed and you're willing to do that work, you can make it happen. So the second thing, probably hear all that noise in the background. Speaking of being a father, my son's having a sleepover tonight. So I got a bunch of wild teenage boys running up and down the stairs. All right, second thing, if you're a single dad or a dad separated by your sons by divorce, or a dad who has inherited a son through remarriage, seek help and a sound strategy, right? Like, don't try to just climb this mountain all by yourself. I would say that even if you're not a single dad, if you're married, right, and you have kids, you should always seek help and a sound strategy, because there's no book on parenting, and people that have been through things before can impart that wisdom and help you. And a lot of times it's tough being a parent, and that can be a big struggle for kids in their relationship with their parents. So some advice there would be read, and read some more. You could never read enough books on parenting. You could never read enough books on relationships. You could never read enough books on communication. Sharpen that skill set. It'll pay dividends in not only your relationship with your son, or your daughter, but it'll pay dividends in your marriage and with your spouse and with everybody that you come in contact with. The second thing, just to reiterate, right? See a counselor. There's no shame in going to see a counselor. Right? A counselor is like a coach for your emotional and intellectual well-being and your spiritual well-being in some cases as well. Right? Michael Jordan had a coach, and he was the greatest basketball player that ever played. Sorry, you LeBron fans, even though I love LeBron. But all good athletes have a coach, somebody that can give them objective advice and point them in the right way. Why wouldn't you want to get that advice? And why wouldn't you want to get that help from somebody who can help you see those things? And that's a counselor. I've been to lots of counselors throughout my life, and every time I've gone to see a counselor, I've gotten further clarity, and I've further increased the quality of my life. There's no shame with getting help and talking with somebody and getting objective advice. I got guys who reach out to me all the time just to be an ear, so that they can share stuff, listen, and then if they want it, I can give them some feedback, because I'm not invested in the situation. And that's the best position to be in, because you can see a lot of stuff that person can't see because they're blinded by emotion, fear, all types of things that confuse us, right, when we're in the middle of things. There's a great verse in the Bible. I believe it's out of Proverbs. I don't remember which chapter or verse, but in the multitude of counselors, right, there's victory. There you go. Solomon, the wisest man on earth, said that. 3, if you're a son wounded by dad, choose to touch this wound responsibly. So what does that mean, right? If you have been hurt by your father, you have some work to do. And it's tough work. And if you acknowledge that it's tough work and that it's hard work, you need to go about it in a responsible way. That doesn't mean you decide one day, you know what, I'm going to reconnect with my dad, and you call him up and you just let him have it. You just beat the piss out of him over the phone, or maybe you're lucky or brave enough and you're lucky enough to have a face-to-face meeting, and you just tell him how he's never been a good dad and he's a no good, low down piece of dog crap, right? And you just smash him over the head verbally with a sledgehammer. That's not treating that wound responsibly. That's not healing. I mean, don't get me wrong, it would probably feel good. I mean, because there was times where I've just wanted to unload on my dad, right, and say those things. Um, but it's not going to move the relationship further. And while it feels good in the moment, it's only going to set you further back. And that's not what you want. You want to be able to get on the other side of this thing so that you can enjoy the peace and the freedom that comes with that. And we'll talk a little bit about how you do that responsibly, right? And the first thing is you got to choose to forgive your dad. And holy crap, that's a freaking hard one. Especially if, it was like my dad, right? Like, who made all these promises, said he was always going to be there, and then every time he'd leave. And then something would happen in life that would bring him back. And he'd say the same thing over again. And then he'd leave. Over and over and over. I don't want to forgive my dad. But man, holding on to that is bitterness. And it's like my pastor says, bitterness is like drinking poison and hoping the other person gets sick. And if you can do this hard work and you can come to a place where you can forgive your dad and let go of all that, the only analogy that I can think of, right, because I had to walk through this, is there was this cartoon when I was a kid, and it was a Mickey Mouse cartoon. And in this cartoon, Mickey Mouse is this like tailor, and he happens to, these flies are bothering him, and he swats these flies, and he kills, I think it was 7 in one hit. Well, at the same time this is going on, there's a giant in the kingdom, and he's wrecking havoc. And the king wants to do something about it. He wants to find somebody that can take on this giant, and he's willing to offer this person money and his daughter's hand in marriage. And Mickey doesn't know about this. So he smashes the 7 flies with one hit, and then he opens the door to his shop and yells out the window, "I killed 7 with one hit." And the conversation that's going on out in the village is about the giant. So they automatically assume that Mickey's talking about the giant. So they bring him in front of the king. The king's like, "I want you to kill the giant." And he doesn't admit that he was talking about flies. He has all this pride, and he says, "All right, I'll go do it." And he seeks out to kill this giant. And then he finds this giant, and the way that he takes the giant down is he wraps all this thread from his needle around the giant, right, so that the giant can't move, and then the giant falls over, and I think the giant hits his head and dies or whatever. But my point in bringing this story is, like, when you have all this bitterness, you're the giant, and that bitterness is the threads from the needle that is holding you tight and got you so balled up that you're being held hostage. And the way that I felt after I was willing to let go and forgive my dad is like, in this example, Mickey, right, who would be God in my life, came by and snip, 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 and those threads broke away. And all of a sudden I could stand up and I could be free. And it was like this confidence and this power and this feeling like that I've never felt before, to just lay all that down. It's like being 200 pounds lighter, walking on air. I mean, it was just incredible. It was hard, don't get me wrong, but getting on the other side of that was incredible. So I guess leave that analogy and those thoughts with you. The second thing is you got to choose to believe in God's justice, right? Because we're all going to stand before God one day and have to give an account for how we stewarded the things that God brought into our life. And if God gave us kids, we're going to have to be responsible for how we treated them and how we raised them, right? And my dad, he had to face God and explain, the way that he treated me and my brother and my sister in that whole deal. That's not my responsibility to make him responsible for that. That's between him and God. So I just had to trust that, God in his infinite wisdom would work that out, and that was between those two. I need to do my part, and my part was I need to forgive him. 4. If you're a son wounded by dad, courageously seek reconciliation with your father. Man, in my case, my dad was dead, so I couldn't do that. But nonetheless, it still was extremely freeing to be able to deal with these things and to forgive my father. But this makes me think of this story that a guy shared with me. And I'll just give you a little bit of details because it's not my story 100% to share, even though I've been given permission. But this son had been estranged from his father, I want to say for 20 years, right? And what comes with that? All the fear that if you go back to your father and ask for a relationship, that can't be restored. And that's what he was. He was fearful of that. And the crazy thing about it is, you could probably guess, there was reconciliation, but the shame that the father felt towards leaving his son and thinking that he wasn't good enough, he wasn't worthy of his son's love. And here these two people are, this son and this dad, and they both want the same thing, which is relationship. And on one end, the son is fearful, and on the other end, the father is shameful for what he did. And they're both believing these lies, right, that are keeping them from the truth, which the truth is that they both want a relationship. And it took tremendous courage for both of them to get to a place. First, it took courage for the son to move towards his father and try to reconciliate. And then it took courage for the dad, right, to get over his shame and agree to meet with his son and begin to build that relationship that they never had. And this story was just powerful. The way the son was able to forgive the dad was able to ask for forgiveness and repent of the way he treated his son, and now the great relationship that they actually have because of the son seeking reconciliation, right? So if you've been wounded by your dad, I want to encourage you, seek reconciliation with him. And that's not the only story I've heard of sons seeking out their dads to make things better. There may be a separation between you and your dad that springs from, their shortcomings. My dad had a lot of shortcomings. I don't know what they are, but I could obviously tell, because there's a saying, right? Hurt people hurt people. You only know what you know. So I just think about my life, right? So I didn't know what a good marriage looked like because my mom and dad were divorced. I didn't know what being a good dad looked like because my dad wasn't around, right? But I didn't have to let those shortcomings stop me. And it goes back to, point number 2, seeking help and learning from those around you. But I say all this to say that try not to hold that against your father, right? Because your father's the way, he isn't your father. How do I articulate this? Your father is the way that he is because of the things that happened in his life to him. If you go way back to the first session we ever did in this workbook, we talked about the history of manhood in this country and what happened and how the relationship between the son and the father was so tight because the sons worked alongside their fathers every day on the farm. They got to see dad work. They got to see how dad interacted. They got to learn things firsthand from dad. And then came the Industrial Revolution, which took dad out of the house. And he was gone for 8 to 10 hours. Then came the World Wars, right? Which then took him out of the country for months, years at a time. And then he came back. And he was physically present, but he was emotionally gone. And then we had this cascading ladder or steps of different things in society that further hurt men and damaged those relationships that brought us to where we are today. So just like I've got shortcomings, just like you've got shortcomings, Your father has shortcomings. And you got to be able to realize that, that doesn't make whatever they did right. Please hear me. That doesn't make it right. But you got to have a little bit of empathy to understand where they're coming from and what they may have experienced. You may talk to your father and you may restore that relationship, and you may find out your dad went through some crazy stuff. I mean, some crazy stuff. And that'll just further shed light onto, what happened and all in the past. So don't believe the lie. Move towards your father. Hand it over to God and let him do his work. There may be separation between you and your dad that springs from past conflict. You need to clean it up, right? You're a man. Take responsibility. You may not have done anything. It may have been all him. But you got a choice. You can let it keep going the way it's going, or you can choose to do something about it. And that's seek reconciliation. That's seeking to clean up the junk. All right, before we talk about 5 here, let me give you a good strategy to make 3 and 4 happen, right? Because you got to be responsible with touching this wound, and you got to take responsibility for where your relationship is at now in seeking that reconciliation. What I suggest you do is I suggest you write your dad a letter. Get it all out on paper. Before you write that letter, I would suggest that you pray to God and you ask him to help you be honoring but truthful in this letter. And then write the letter. And don't send it right away. Find somebody in your life that you can trust or that you know will give you an honest opinion, and ask them to read the letter. And ask them if there's love, honor, but truth as well in that letter. And then based upon what they say, if they agree that it's loving, that it's truthful, and that it's honoring, send the letter to your dad. He may not respond. That's okay. You're not doing it for your dad. You're doing it for yourself, first of all, to release all this and to get all this stuff, all this junk inside of you out. Okay? That's primarily why you're doing it. Now, the second thing is, you do want a relationship with your father, and if he doesn't respond, don't let that stop you. Then my suggestion would be to pick up the phone, or if you're feeling a little more braver than that, go to his house. Try to talk to him about it. And just remember, truth, love, and honor when you talk to him. And it's going to be hard. I have no doubt about that. If your dad did some crazy stuff to you, absolutely it's going to be hard. And there's going to be a lot of emotion there. But if you can come from a place of truth, love, and honor, I believe that God will honor you in the way that you approach your father. And he will begin to work. And he will open your dad's heart up. And he will open your dad's eyes up. And that process of reconciliation will begin. So, number 5. If you're a son wounded by dad, risk asking for your father's love. Man, I can't tell you the number of guys that I've heard tell me that they've never had their dad tell them that they love them. I mean, for as messed up as my dad was and, being in and out of my life, there was a handful of times where my dad told me that he loved me. Now, his actions didn't always seem like they backed it up, so that caused a lot of doubt in my life. But I can't imagine going through your life and never having your dad tell you that he loves you. You deserve that. You deserve to hear that. And my prayer for you would be that your dad would acknowledge that, and God would help him to recognize that. And then he would be able to verbalize that to you, that he does love you. Number 6. If you're a son wounded by dad, risk asking for your father's blessing. Right? What is a blessing? There's lots of different blessings. But what a blessing looks like is when a father comes alongside his son and speaks words of encouragement and cast vision over his son. I talked about that last week because that's part of the manhood ceremony, right? Where you speak a blessing over him, where you cast vision over him, right? And you want your father to give you his blessing. And, if your dad doesn't know what a blessing looks like, that's okay. Maybe you go to him and you say, hey, Dad, and as you're navigating this relationship and restoring it, and you say, Dad, I really need you to bless me as a father, to bless me as your son. Do you think you could do that? And just leave it at that. And God will tell him what to say. God will put it in his heart what to do. Don't trust him. Trust God. He'll handle it for you. Because ultimately, he's your spiritual father. Number 7. If you're a son wounded by dad, reclaim the relationship you missed by becoming a good dad to your children. Can't tell you how important that is. Right? Because let's face the facts. There's going to be some of us where we're not going to be able to reconcile with our fathers because they're dead, or for whatever reason, because of the shame in their life, they can't move into that place. They just can't. Well, you know what? That doesn't stop you from being able to change your family tree and to be able to plant seeds of love, honor, character, respect, to give your kids all the things that you wish your father would have gave you. Right? You know what that looks like. You know inside your heart exactly what you've always wanted from your dad. Give it to your kids. Make sure that they don't go through what you went through. Sometimes it's easier said than done. But you know what? You got what it takes inside. Just gotta walk it out. Don't matter where you came from. Don't matter what you've been through. We all got a choice. How are we going to live tomorrow? What are we going to do? What decisions are we going to make? So that's it as far as right here in the formal lesson. Before I go, I want to leave you guys... what want to do here? I want to leave you guys with a couple of questions to think about, right? Journal about. And this is going to help cap off tonight's lesson, I guess. So the first thing, right? You need to figure out, have you released dad and assumed responsibility for your own life? Don't go the rest of your life with making excuses for how you turned out because of what your dad did to you. 2, if you could sit down and bare your soul to your father, what would you say to him? And this is where the letter comes in, right? Even if your dad is dead, I would encourage you to write this letter. The power that it has in doing this can't be articulated. It just can't. 3, which of the 7 father wound remedies could you apply to your life right now? And explain that. And then number 4, what do your children need from you right now? And then here's the just punch in the gut sometimes. Are there things you are doing or not doing that may cause your children to be wounded later in life? Man, that's heavy. That's a heavy one to think about. So, I really hope that you'll take the time to explore these things, write these things out for yourself, and make strides, right? A lot of good stuff that we went over tonight. We're not done as we continue to plow through 2019. I really appreciate you guys tuning into this content and just leaving the comments that you guys do. and sharing the impact these things are having on your lives, whether that's publicly on Facebook or just the messages that I receive from guys. If you know a brother that could use this, and I would say there's a lot of them out there. Please don't keep this to yourself. Share it. Right? This isn't about me getting famous, not making any money off of this. I'm doing it because I care. I care about you. I care about other guys. I just see the stuff that we go through, right, in everyday life, and how when we don't have good friends, we don't have people to come alongside us and to speak truth and life into us, we do all kinds of crazy crap, man, that just blows everything up. And then we hurt ourselves and we hurt others in the process. And that's sad. And I'm just doing what I can to stop that. So thanks for tuning in. I love you guys. See you tomorrow for the Saturday shout out. Have a good night.